Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera. This is my second video today from Aoyama Park. The weather is still very sunny and nice today, but it's quite cool. When I saw the weather today, I thought it was going to be really nice, and I put on shorts. And I found out that the weather's actually a little bit too cool to wear shorts today. And it's really crazy to be in the third week of July in Tokyo and the weather is too cool to wear shorts. And I kind of regret not wearing pants because first, it's a little bit cool here, and second, there are a lot of mosquitoes at the park. So from time to time I'm kind of swatting or scratching because the mosquitoes are giving me a hard time here. Luckily there aren't as many as there would be if it were a really warm day, but still they're kind of annoying. It's so crazy with the cool weather here. A few weeks ago we decided to book a trip to Hokkaido, as we thought it would be a nice way to escape the heat and humidity of Tokyo. But the way it looks right now, it might actually be warmer in Hokkaido than it is here. We decided to travel to Hokkaido for another reason, and that was back in June or so. The Japanese government came up with this program called the Go-To program. And what this was made to do was to encourage Japanese people to travel around the country. And if you traveled domestically and stayed at a hotel or hot spring resort or something like that, you could apply for a 30% rebate from the Japanese government. So my wife thought, wow, this is a really wonderful deal. Not only can we travel, we can actually stay at a nicer place because we're getting a 30% discount. So she went and she booked a nice hotel for us and family, friends, and the ferry and all this stuff, and activities and everything. And so we were quite happy and ready to go on our vacation to Hokkaido. But then about, I guess, 10 days ago or so, in Tokyo, the virus cases began to increase to over 200 per day, which compared to other places around the world isn't very much, but for Tokyo is quite high. And so Tokyo decided to disqualify Tokyo residents from the Go-To program. And a lot of people here are kind of scratching their heads. They think, well, it's about an average of 200 cases per day, but 40 million people live in the Tokyo area. And places outside Tokyo, which are getting like maybe 5 or 10 cases per day. It sounds like a low number, but when you consider 40 million people live in the Tokyo area, and these other places maybe 3 or 4 million people live, on a per capita basis, these places with lower case numbers each day actually have a higher number of cases. So it's kind of a strange thing. And also when you consider that more than 1/3 of the population lives in Tokyo, and you disqualify that percentage from participating in the Go-To program, it kind of negates the purpose of ever beginning it in the first place. So I just had to put out a little bit of a rant there about my dissatisfaction with the Go-To program. But we'll go ahead and move on to better things, and today is a really better thing. I'm going to be talking about one of the best of the Minolta rangefinder cameras, or any of their cameras for that matter, and that is the Minolta 35 2B rangefinder camera. Minolta began making rangefinder cameras at the end of World War II, the LTM style rangefinder cameras. Minolta made cameras before the war, of course, but cameras and photographic equipment were one of those things which Japan could easily export from the country, and mainly into markets like America, where there were zero tariffs applied to things like Japanese cameras and electronics. So Japanese camera manufacturers began producing all kinds of cameras in the post-war years. The first ones were sold mainly to American servicemen who were living and working in Japan at the time. And my grandfather was one of those, and he brought home some things which he bought at the PX in Ginza while he was here in Tokyo. And these cameras caught on, and they began to sell more of them in Japan as the economy improved and Japanese people began getting back to work and making more money. The earlier cameras were quite primitive and simple, and as manufacturing and tooling and materials and other things improved in the years after the war and into the 1950s, so did the quality of Japanese cameras and optics. And the high point of these particular cameras made by Minolta was in 1958 when the 2B was released. compared to, say, the Canon rangefinder camera or Nikon rangefinder cameras. The Minolta is still very much a traditional style, very much like the Leica cameras, which it copies. It's a much better design to the earlier Minolta cameras and most of the other similar Leica copy cameras. It featured very high quality materials and workmanship, and a main improvement in this camera over the other cameras was the quality of the shutter curtains. I come across the earlier Minolta rangefinder cameras from time to time, but I generally kind of avoid them because so far I've picked up like 5 or 6 over the last 10 years, and every single example the shutter curtains are rotted or dried out and the shutters simply don't work properly. So I really can't do much other than replace the shutter curtains and all that, and that's not really economical. It's kind of a lot of work to replace the shutter curtains on one of these Leica type cameras and set it up and whatever. It's not really worth the time or effort for me. But by the late 1950s, the material used in the shutter curtains was much improved, mainly because the ones made in the post-war era were already rotting and suffering failures by the 1950s. So Nikon began using what they called the Habutai rubberized silk curtains, and Minolta used the same kind. And so it's quite difficult to find, say, a Nikon S3, S4, or SP with rotted shutter curtains, and the same is true of the Minolta 2B. So quite a robust design. That was really the only flaw in the Minolta LTM rangefinder cameras, was the shutter curtains. Everything else on them was quite solid. The 2B is the most advanced of the Minolta LTM style cameras, so we'll go ahead and take a tour of the features and functions of the camera, starting from the top. And the 2B has a very similar film rewind knob to the A2, which I did an earlier video about. The same design with the same retaining screw on the bottom. Moving across the top here, we have the shoe for mounting a flash gun. And this is a much better design than the other cameras which Minolta made. The other cameras used, like, say, the A2 here, simply have a flat spring plate which is screwed down on the top, and this kind of pinches against the base of the flash gun, whereas the A2 features a couple of pawls on the bottom which have springs underneath, which allow for a more precise engagement and fitment of the flash gun. And also the flash sync socket is located very close to the shoe, whereas on other LTM cameras you usually find the sync socket located somewhere on the front. It's kind of difficult to do on the Minolta cameras due to the location of the self-timer, the secondary shutter speed dial, and if you run the cable around on this side, it's going to kind of block off the viewfinder. So quite a logical place to set it. On the top here you have the shutter speed dial next to the flash shoe, and like other LTM cameras, earlier cameras, you should charge the shutter before setting the shutter speed. You have to do that in order for the shutter speed to line up with the arrow, or the indicator arrow on the top. Next to the shutter speed lever, we have the rewind knob. So to rewind the film, you must push this lever from the A over to the R setting, and then you can rewind the film. And of course, next to that, we have the film winding and shutter charging lever, which has a counting dial on the top, which you have to manually reset when you load film. On the back here, we have just a single window which has an integrated viewfinder and rangefinder assembly. Earlier cameras often had 2 windows. We have a separate rangefinder and viewfinder, so this is much easier to use. Another wonderful thing is the fact that the Minolta 2B has a shutter charging lever on the top rather than a knob, which you find on many similar cameras and some of the earlier Minolta cameras. Another cool thing about the Minolta 2B is that it has a film door on the back which pops open instead of having to remove the film back like you have to do on the Nikon rangefinder cameras. Though the winding system is, or I guess the latch system, is a little bit difficult to use compared to like the Canon system, which is much easier. One thing you have to remember when you are loading film into the camera or opening the back door is that you have to make sure to push the film wind lever down before you close the door, because there's a catch here on this side of the film door which fits in between the forks and the top of the rewind mechanism. If you let it fall out and you close the door, you can't push down. It won't come down all the way. So make sure that this is pressed down properly, and then you have to move it to the shut position, and that locks the film door closed. On the other side of the bottom here, we have a standard 1/4" tripod socket. We have the lugs here for mounting the straps on the front. These are steel lugs, and they're quite durable and are kind of difficult to pull out compared to other cameras. Some cameras that I come across of this vintage you have to be careful of, because these lugs are sometimes made of cast zinc, which can be broken if you're not careful. A good shock on the strap lugs and they can either break themselves, or they're kind of riveted in and the rivets come out. But these are quite durable, so you don't have to worry about that problem here. On the front of the camera we have the secondary shutter speed lever. So in order to use that, you have to turn the upper lever until the 1/25th lines up with the red mark, and then you can adjust the slow speeds using the front dial. By turning it to the red 25, that gives you 1/4 second. And next to that is the flash sync. That's denoted by the X, and that's for when you're running a bulb flash. And that's about 1/20th of a second, and then you end up 1/8, 1/4, and then 1/2 second, and then 1 second, which works quite well on this camera. And then you have a T setting, which is quite convenient. Being that this is an LTM camera, which uses standard Leica threads, you can fit pretty much any LTM lens on the front. We have kind of a groove on the bottom here for the earlier lenses with the locking tab, and this allows those lenses to be operated on the 2B. A number of different lens options were available for this camera. Earlier ones had a 45mm lens. Later ones usually had a standard 50mm lens. The lens design on these cameras is about the same as on, say, like the Super A here, which also features an interchangeable lens system. The standard lens on the 2B was a 50mm f.2 lens, which was an option also on the Super A. This camera has the optional 50mm Rollcore f1.8 lens, and that was also an option on the Super A. But due to the rarity, the Super A lenses tend to be quite a bit more expensive, even though they can't be used on another mount. The lenses on these cameras, the Super Rollcore lenses, are quite wonderful, and particularly these later versions, which were produced in the late 50s, when Japan finally was producing very high quality glass. And people of that era said that it was just as good, if not better, than the lenses made by Leica at the time. The 2B is a quite rare camera, and I don't come across very many of these in Japan. This one doesn't belong to me. I picked this one up for a friend who wanted it in America, and this will be on its way to him tomorrow. I hope you enjoy the video. Hopefully you learn something about how to use your camera from it. A great camera. I'm going to keep my eye open for more of these in the future, so hopefully I'll get a few of these and I'll be able to put them up for sale in my store. I don't know how much of a demand there is for these. Due to their rarity, not a lot of people know much about the 2B, but an excellent camera. Anyway, I'm running out of time here. It's after 3:30 and I've got to take our dog to his photo shoot. We get we got coupons from the local photographer for a discount, not free, but discount photos of family and pets. Well, we've got to go ahead and get those taken. I hope you enjoyed the video about the Minolta 2B rangefinder camera. If you're interested in buying a vintage Japanese camera, I sell these in my online store, japanvintagecamera.com. I also sell these at my Etsy and eBay stores. Please check the description below the video for links to my stores. If you want to see more videos about Japanese vintage cameras or photography in Japan, please subscribe. I'll be posting more videos shortly. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.